Have you ever seen a moment so small, yet it changes an entire family's life forever? In the middle of a crowded supermarket, a young worker knelt beside a girl no one else understood, and within seconds, everything spiraled into a decision that would shock even a millionaire CEO. What happened next is a reminder of how compassion can rewrite destiny. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me from which country and at what time are you watching this story? On an ordinary autumn afternoon in Vermont, the brightest lights in Maple Mart suddenly dimmed right when a little girl's world was falling apart. No one noticed it at first. Shoppers kept pushing their carts past stacks of pumpkins and discounted apples, chatting about dinner plans or weather reports. But Rowan Hale, kneeling by a lower shelf in aisle 7, felt something shift in the air, an unsettled tremor, like a soft chord out of tune. It reminded her of something she hadn't thought about in years. A moment from childhood when her younger brother had folded into himself in the middle of a grocery store aisle just like this one. That memory moved through her quietly, the way old echoes sometimes do. She stood up slowly, brushing dust from her jeans, and listened again. Then she heard it clearly, thin, sharp sobs. The kind that came from fear rather than misbehavior. The kind no child could hide. Rowan took a breath, steady and sure, and followed the sound around the cereal display. The overhead lights flickered a little, humming loudly like they always did during busy hours. There, on the cool tile floor, sat a little girl curled around a plush fox, her small shoulders trembling, her fingers pressed tight over her ears, shutting out a world that had suddenly grown too loud, too bright, too full. People walked past, looking with a mixture of sympathy and irritation, some whispering things that stung Rowan just to hear. Someone muttered that the child must be misbehaving. Someone else wondered why parents couldn't keep kids under control. Those words drifted through the air like brittle leaves, uncaring and sharp. Rowan knelt a few feet away, keeping her distance so the little one wouldn't feel trapped. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who had seen this before and knew the path out. "I'm not going to touch you. I'm just right here." Her tone was the kind older radio hosts used on early Sunday mornings. Slow, gentle, meant to soothe rather than startle. The girl didn't look at her, but her rocking slowed by the tiniest fraction. The lights above were too harsh. Rowan could see it immediately. Without hesitating, she rose and reached for the employee override switch she had used 100 times for restocking work. With a quick flick, the brightness over their aisle softened. Natural light from the windows spilled across the floor, warm and golden. It felt like the kind of light that comes just before evening settles in. The kind Rowan's grandmother used to call kind light. The change was almost invisible to the passing crowd, but to the little girl, it was everything. Her breath hitched in surprise before slowing just a little, just enough. Rowan came back down to her knees. "There we go," she murmured, the way someone might speak to a skittish bird. "It's a little cuter now." The girl's fingers loosened around her fox. Her chest still rose and fell too fast, but the panic wasn't climbing anymore. Rowan waited, patient as the tide. There was no hurrying moments like this. They had their own rhythm, their own time. "What's your name?" she asked gently. A few heartbeats passed. Then, barely audible, the girl whispered, "Elara." "That's a beautiful name," Rowan replied, smiling softly. "Elara, do you know where your mom or dad is?" My dad," she said, breath quivering. "Too many people, too much noise." She squeezed her fox harder, grounding herself against the feel of its soft fur. Rowan nodded slowly. "I hear you, and it's okay. We're going to help your breathing first, all right? Then we'll find your dad together." She guided her through simple grounding. 3 things she could see, 2 she could hear, 1 she could touch. Elara followed, shaky but trying, and Rowan could feel the storm inside the girl easing, not gone, but softening around the edges. When Elara finally shifted closer, her tiny hand hovering uncertainly in the air, Rowan didn't move to take it. She simply waited until the girl chose. And she did slowly, bravely, her fingers slipping into Rowan's with a trust that felt like a tiny spark in the dimmed aisle. They walked together toward the front of the store, moving at Elara's pace, Rowan shielding her from the busiest parts of the crowd. The store's intercom crackled faintly overhead, but for Elara, the scariest part of the day was already behind them. As they rounded the corner, a tall man in a charcoal suit stood with the manager, his face tight with panic and fear. Ilara spotted him instantly. "Daddy." She let go of Rowan's hand and ran. Ilara ran straight into the man's arms, and the moment he lifted her, it was as if the air finally left his lungs. Bennett Callington held his daughter tight against his chest, one hand pressed protectively over the back of her small head, his breaths coming in shaky waves. The worry on his face softened into something close to relief, but beneath it was a tremor of guilt, an old, familiar weight, the kind only a parent who fears failing their child could understand. "I was so scared," he whispered into her hair. "I turned around and you were gone." Ilara clung to him, her little fingers curling into his suit jacket. "It was too loud, too bright. I couldn't breathe." Bennett closed his eyes, the words piercing deeper than any accusation ever could. When he finally looked up, his gaze landed on Rowan. At first, it was the look of a man still catching his breath, then recognition dawned. He took in the dimmed lights above them, the calm in his daughter's body, the way Ilara still held her fox plush, the way Rowan had shown her. Gratitude spread across his expression, slow and dawning like morning light rising over Lake Champlain. "You helped her," he said quietly, still holding Ilara close. You made this better. Thank you." Rowan offered a small nod. "She just needed a quieter world for a moment. That's all." For a heartbeat, it felt like the aisle itself softened around them. Bennett's suit looked slightly rumpled from kneeling earlier, his tie skewed, his hair out of place. He didn't look like a CEO of anything, just a father whose world had nearly slipped through his fingers. Ilara pressed her face into his shoulder and mumbled, "She made the lights soft." Bennett's throat tightened at that, and Rowan saw the emotion flicker plainly across his features. Before he could say more, the familiar, sharp footsteps of Marjorie Flint approached, echoing against the polished tile like the ticking of a warning clock. Her expression was stern, tight with impatience. She surveyed the scene-dimmed lights, customers whispering, Rowan kneeling on the floor not long before, and her jaw tightened. "Mr. Callington, is everything all right now?" she asked, though her tone suggested she was more concerned about store order than anyone's well-being. "It is, thanks to her," Bennett replied, shifting Ilara slightly so the girl could rest easier. His eyes flicked toward Rowan again, gentler now, carrying unspoken appreciation. Marjorie didn't follow his gaze. "Good. Then we can address the problem at hand." She turned fully toward Rowan, her voice rising just enough to draw the attention of nearby customers. "Miss Hale, I need to speak with you immediately." Rowan straightened, brushing her palms subtly against her jeans, as if trying to shake off the last pieces of tension. She glanced once more at Ilara, who peeked over her father's shoulder, her expression fragile but steadier than before. The small connection between them warmed Rowan's chest, though she knew what was coming. She'd seen this look on Marjorie before the rigid adherence to rules, the refusal to consider nuance. Marjorie's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing. "You've disrupted the entire lighting system for this aisle. I've gotten multiple complaints. You abandoned your stocking duties. This is unacceptable." "She was helping my daughter," Bennett interjected, his tone calm but firm. "My daughter was in distress." Marjorie didn't blink. "This is not about the child." "This is about protocol." Rowan felt the words like small, blunt blows, not painful, exactly, just familiar, the way old disappointments settled quietly in the bones. She could already sense the decision that had been made long before she arrived at the office. But she wasn't going to protest. Helping Ilara had been the only thing that mattered in that moment. She let out a slow breath, one steadying heartbeat at a time. Marjorie took a step closer, her voice low, sharp, final. "Rowan Hale, step into my office, now." Marjorie's voice cut through the aisle like a blade, and the look on her face said Rowan was about to lose far more than just a shift. The hallway leading to the Maple Mart back office was narrow and overly bright, humming with the kind of fluorescent buzz that always made Rowan feel like she was walking through a tunnel of judgment. She followed Marjorie Flint in silence, her footsteps soft against the worn linoleum. The sounds of the grocery store faded behind her carts rolling, children asking for treats, the familiar beep of scanners. Yet each sound seemed distant now, muffled, as if wrapped in a layer of fog. Marjorie pushed open the office door without waiting and stepped inside. Rowan entered after her, the familiar scent of stale coffee and printed receipts settling like a curtain over the room. The small window behind Marjorie's desk overlooked the parking lot, where early autumn clouds hung low and gray, heavy with the promise of late-day drizzle. It was the kind of weather that usually brought comfort to Rowan, but today the sky felt indifferent. "Sit," Marjorie said, motioning toward a metal chair across from her desk. Rowan sat carefully, folding her hands in her lap. She felt the faint cold of the chair seep through her jeans, grounding her in a way she didn't quite want. Marjorie began gathering a stack of forms, aligning their edges with sharp, purposeful motions. "We have a serious issue," she said, her tone clipped. "You abandoned your assigned aisle and interfered with store operations." Rowan kept her voice steady. "A child was having a sensory meltdown. The lights were hurting her." "This is a business, Miss Hale," Marjorie interrupted. "We cannot compromise store functions every time someone becomes upset." "Oh." The words were crisp, flat, leaves stripped of color. Rowan had heard variations of them before from teachers who didn't understand her brother, from supervisors who preferred rules over people. She felt a small ache in her chest at the memory, but she kept her expression calm. "I wasn't trying to compromise anything," Rowan said. "I was trying to keep her safe. She couldn't breathe." Marjorie set down the papers and leaned forward. "You made a unilateral decision to manipulate the lighting grid. There were customer complaints." Complaints. She emphasized the word, as if it alone justified everything that would follow. Rowan swallowed gently, letting the ache settle deeper. "Sometimes," she said softly, "you can't wait for approval. You just have to help." Marjorie's expression didn't budge. "That is not your call to make." From the hallway came, muted, whispers other employees, lingering just out of sight. Rowan recognized their tones. Not hostility, but fear of involvement. People didn't interfere when rules were being enforced. Vermont niceness only stretched so far when protocol stepped in. Marjorie slid one final paper across the desk. "Effective immediately. Your employment with Maple Mart is terminated. Please clear your locker and return any store property." Rowan stared at the page, not in shock, but in a quiet acceptance she hadn't expected. She traced the edges of the document with her gaze, letting a slow breath travel through her chest. Losing the job stung, but helping Alara had never felt like the wrong choice. Outside the window, a single maple leaf floated down and landed on the pavement, its deep red, a stark contrast against the gray. It reminded her of the way Alara's breathing had steadied beneath softened light. She held onto that memory like a small flame cupped between her palms. Marjorie tapped the desk. "Keys, please." Rowan removed her lanyard and placed it gently on the table. Her hands didn't shake. She had expected something like this ever since she flipped that switch. She stood slowly, smoothing the front of her worn sweater. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said, though she wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was habit, or kindness, or simply the way her grandmother had raised her to leave places with grace, even when grace wasn't offered in return. She stepped out of the office, closing the door quietly behind her. The sound wasn't loud, but it felt final. The locker room smelled faintly of detergent and cardboard. Rowan gathered her belongings, a folded sweater, her lunch bag, a photo of her brother smiling at a fall fair years ago. She paused with the picture in her hand, tracing her thumb along the corner where the laminate had begun to peel. He had looked overwhelmed that day too, and she had been the one to calm him down. That memory pressed warmly against her ribs, reminding her why she had reacted instinctively with Alara. When she stepped outside, the early evening air wrapped around her like a cool sigh. Clouds had thickened, dimming the world into soft gray tones that felt gentler on her eyes than the sharp lights inside. She held her cardboard box close, balancing it carefully as she walked across the parking lot. She didn't look back at the store. Instead, she focused on the sound of her own footsteps, slow and even, like a rhythm she could trust. That was when she heard someone running quick, determined strides heading straight toward her. Rowan turned, steadying the cardboard box against her hip as the footsteps grew louder. Bennett Calington was crossing the lot in long, determined strides, his suit jacket unbuttoned and catching the faint breeze. Alara held his hand tightly, half walking, half jogging to keep up, her small legs working hard beneath the soft fabric of her lavender leggings. "Miss Hale, wait," Bennett called, breath visible in the cooling air. Rowan stopped beside a row of parked cars, the distant mountains a muted line beyond him, their peaks softened by gathering mist. The late afternoon drizzle had begun, just a few fine drops, but they dotted the pavement like quiet punctuation marks. Bennett reached her first, slightly breathless. "I'm so sorry," he said immediately, the words rushing out as if delayed only by the sprint from the storefront. "I just heard they actually fired you?" Rowan nodded gently. "It's all right," she murmured. "Helping your daughter was more important." Alara peeked from behind her father's side, her grip on the fox plush, tight, but calm. She wasn't hiding, just watching Rowan with that same cautious bravery she'd shown in the aisle. After a moment, she stepped closer and tugged softly at Rowan's sleeve. "You made the light soft," she whispered, like it was a secret she needed to return. Rowan's heart folded a little at the edges. She crouched down to meet the girl's eyes. "I'm glad it helped," she said warmly. "You were very brave." Alara pressed her cheek against her father's arm, comforted just knowing Rowan wasn't upset with her. Across the lot, a gust of cool wind sent a scatter of maple leaves drifting around their feet. Quiet, gentle reminders of a day that had become heavier than any of them expected. Bennett shifted the weight of his briefcase and looked at Rowan with a sincerity that softened the sharp angles of his face. "I'm sorry," he repeated, slower this time. "No one should lose a job for helping a child in distress, least of all mine." "It's really okay," Rowan said softly. "Sometimes doing the right thing costs something." Bennett exhaled, the sound tinged with frustration at a world that rarely understood what children like Alara needed. "Still," he said, rubbing his thumb across Alara's shoulder, "you didn't hesitate. You saw her. Most people don't." For a moment, the parking lot felt suspended in its own quiet pocket of time, just the three of them standing beneath a gray Vermont sky, held together by something that wasn't quite fate but felt close to it. Rowan adjusted the box in her arms. "I should get going," she said gently. "It's been a long day." Alara tugged on her father's sleeve, then pointed toward Rowan's photo tucked into the box. "Is that your brother?" she whispered. Curiosity, mixing with a faint recognition children like her often sensed familiarity in others, long before adults did. Rowan gave a small, warm nod. "Yes, he's older now, but he used to get overwhelmed in stores too." Absent. Alara processed this quietly, then stepped forward again. This time, she didn't speak. She simply reached out and touched Rowan's wrist with two small fingers, a gesture Rowan recognized instantly. Not a hug, not a request. Just connection. Permission. Bennett observed quietly, something shifting inside him. A realization. A dawning. He straightened slightly and cleared his throat. "Rowan," he began. His voice carried something new now. A steadiness. A direction forming. "Would you have a moment? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Rowan blinked, a little surprised. "Of course," she said, though she wasn't sure where this was going. Bennett nodded toward the far end of the lot, where a few unused outdoor benches sat beneath a faded awning. "If you don't mind, could we talk there? I have a question, well, more than one. And it doesn't feel right to ask while you're standing here with a box in your arms." "No." Rowan hesitated only long enough to shift the weight of the box again. "All right," she said softly. "Let's talk." They walked together in a small, quiet procession. Bennett, Rowan, and little Alara padding softly beside them toward a conversation none of them yet knew would alter the shape of their lives. As they reached the bench, Bennett gestured for Rowan to sit. The moment felt gentle, careful, respectful. But before any of them settled, a new voice called from across the lot, cutting through the soft drizzle. "Mr. Calington, sir. Your car, there's been a mix-up." Rowan turned toward the sound, confused, as Bennett's brows lifted sharply. The commotion grew louder. Footsteps approaching fast. Something unexpected was unfolding, and whatever Bennett had meant to tell her would have to wait. The man running toward them wasn't a threat, just a frazzled Maple Mart employee waving his arms as if the world depended on it. His apron was askew, his pencil tucked behind one ear, and his breath came out in puffed clouds as the drizzle thickened. "Mr. Calington, sir! I'm so sorry your driver parked in the wrong loading zone and we need him to move. Delivery trucks are backing up." Bennett blinked, the interruption momentarily scattering his thoughts. "Right. Yes. I'll handle it in a moment." He lifted a hand in assurance, and the young employee nodded, retreating with hurried steps. The brief disruption broke the fragile pocket of quiet around them, but when Bennett looked back at Rowan, the intention in his eyes remained unchanged. Something about the way he stood straightening his shoulders, Anchoring his breath made it clear he hadn't lost his direction, only paused it. "Sorry about that," he said, a rueful warmth touching his voice. "Life doesn't always pick good timing." Rowan allowed a small smile. "It rarely does." Ilara pressed closer to her father's leg as the wind brushed through her hair, the gentle drizzle now turning the pavement darker, richer. The awning above the empty benches offered shelter beneath its faded blue canvas. Bennett gestured again, quietly inviting Rowan to sit. She settled onto the bench, resting her box beside her feet. Ilara stood between them, her fox plush tucked securely under one arm, as if she were guarding the conversation. Bennett took a slow breath, glancing from his daughter to the woman who had calmed her so effortlessly. His voice lowered, softer than before. "Rowan, what you did today wasn't small. You changed the entire direction of my afternoon, honestly, of my thinking." Rowan folded her hands in her lap. "I didn't do anything remarkable," she said. "Just saw a child who needed a quieter space." "That's exactly what was remarkable," Bennett replied. He rubbed the side of his thumb against the bench railing, a small, grounding gesture. "Most people don't understand sensory overload. Most adults, myself included, get frustrated first and understanding later. You walked straight into the middle of it like you already knew her." Rowan's eyes softened.
"My younger brother."
"He used to have moments like that. I learned early how to help him breathe." Bennett nodded, the puzzle pieces clicking gently into place. "Then that explains why you saw her so clearly." He looked down at Ilara, brushing a stray maple leaf from her shoulder. "She hasn't had an easy time. Her world gets sharp very quickly, and no matter how many specialists I hire, it still feels like I'm missing something essential." Ilara shifted, kicking her boot lightly against the bench leg. She wasn't upset, only listening, in the quiet, deliberate way of children who hear everything even when they don't look at you. "I thought," Bennett continued softly, "that I'd watch her grow out of the hard parts. But children don't grow out of being themselves." His lips curved gently, but the sadness beneath it lingered. "I think I've been trying too hard to make her fit the world, instead of helping the world fit her." Rowan looked up at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his words. He didn't speak like a CEO. He spoke like a father who carried more weight in his heart than he let anyone see. "Earlier," he said, "when you guided her through grounding, how did you know to do that?" "It helps bring the senses back into balance," Rowan explained. "Naming things she sees or hears shifts the panic. It gives control back to a brain that's overloaded." Bennett listened with the attention of someone memorizing a lifeline. The drizzle outside had thickened into a soft rain now, tapping gently along the awning. Ilara watched each drop roll down the fabric, her breathing steady, her fingers loosening around her fox. Rowan continued. "She just needed someone to understand what was happening." He exhaled, long and slow. "I want to understand. I really do. But sometimes it feels like I'm trying to read a language with half the alphabet missing." "Oh." Rowan's voice matched the rain's soft, but certain. "You're trying. That matters more than you think." For a long moment, Bennett simply looked at her, not with the polite gratitude he'd shown inside the store, but something deeper, something that came from a man realizing he'd just witnessed someone care for his daughter with a tenderness he had struggled to reach. "Rowan," he said finally, "I didn't run out here just to say thank you." She looked at him, waiting. The rain softened the edges of the parking lot, turning every surface, reflective lights, colors, moments, all blurring into one gentle palette. "I came out here because I want to ask you something," Bennett said. Ilara glanced between them, sensing the shift in her father's tone. She stepped closer to Rowan again, her small fingers brushing against Rowan's sleeve in that quiet, seeking way she used hours ago. The world seemed to hold its breath just for a second as Bennett's next words settled between them. Bennett looked down at his daughter, then back at Rowan, as if weighing the shape of a decision long overdue. The rain softened into a mist, curling off the pavement in thin ribbons. Cars rolled by in the distance, their tires sending up small splashes. But under the aging blue awning, the world seemed hushed. "Ilara trusts very few people," Bennett began, his voice low, thoughtful. "Her teachers try, her therapists try, but connection doesn't come easy to her. And yet today, with you, she—" He paused. Not for effect, but because emotion caught the edge of his breath. "She let you near her panic," he continued quietly. "Do you know how rare that is? She let you into her storm and you calmed it. Rowan felt her throat warm at the sincerity in his tone. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Sometimes listening was the only kindness required. Bennett rested a hand gently on his daughter's shoulder. "And when she ran to me in that aisle," he said softly, "the first thing she said wasn't that she was scared. She said, she made the light soft." His voice shook with unspoken meaning, gratitude, wonder, maybe even relief. "You helped her breathe again." Ilara lifted her fox plush and pressed it lightly against Rowan's arm. A tiny gesture of offering. Rowan took in the moment quietly, the way one takes in a slow sunrise without rushing, without speaking, letting the warmth reach her at its own pace. Bennett inhaled, steadying himself. "I know this is forward. I know you just lost your job because of what happened. And I know this may not make sense at first glance." He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly looking far less like a CEO and far more like a parent simply trying to do right by his child. "But I wanted to ask if you would consider something." Rowan tilted her head gently. "Consider what?" "To work with Ilara," he said. "Not at a store, not under fluorescent lights and rigid rules, but with us, with her, full time." The words hung there, delicate as the thin mist drifting under the awning. Rowan blinked, absorbing them slowly. "Bennett, I'm not a therapist. I don't have formal training." "You have something more crucial," he answered. "Understanding, patience, experience, and instinct. Things that can't be taught in a course." Ilara reached for Rowan's hand again, small fingers, curling with surprising certainty. She didn't speak, but her eyes did. Quiet hope flickered there. A question, too timid to be voiced aloud. Rowan's breath trembled just slightly. The idea was overwhelming, generous, frightening, beautiful all at once. She felt as if the ground beneath her had shifted, but gently, like a boat rocking against a calm shore. "And the position," Bennett added softly, "would be fully salaried. Benefits, security." He glanced at the cardboard box by Rowan's feet. A chance to not worry about losing everything for doing the right thing. Rain whispered lightly against the awning. Somewhere across the lot, a distant car door slammed. But beneath that canvas shelter, the world felt almost still. Rowan swallowed, her heart unsteady. I need a moment to think." "Of course," Bennett said. "Take all the time you—" He didn't finish, because a sudden burst of noise snapped across the lot. 2 Maple Mart employees rushing out of the sliding doors, frantic and calling for Marjorie. Their voices carried panic, drawing looks from bystanders. A pallet of store supplies had collapsed near the loading area, and one of the employees' carts had been hit, skidding dangerously across the asphalt. Rowan rose halfway from the bench on instinct, alarm tightening her posture. Beside her, Bennett started to turn, and that was the exact moment Marjorie stepped outside, her eyes sweeping the chaos before landing sharply on Rowan and Bennett under the awning. "Rowan Hale!" she called out, her voice slicing through the rain-heavy air. "Don't go far. There's more we need to discuss." Bennett stiffened, his jaw tightening, but Rowan didn't flinch. Not this time, because something in Bennett's offer had already begun altering the ground beneath her feet. And Marjorie seemed to sense it because the next words she spoke carried not just authority, but something sharper. "You're not finished here." The rain had eased into a fine mist by the time Rowan reached the bus stop, her cardboard box held close against her chest. Maple Mart's bright sign glowed behind her, softened by the damp air, until it looked more like a memory than a place she had worked for nearly 3 years. She didn't look back. The day had been heavy enough, without retracing its shadows. The bus shelter was simple, just a glass pane, a metal bench, and a timetable that still had last winter's hours taped beneath the current ones. Vermont Transit was like that, slow to update but reliable when it mattered. Rowan set her box carefully on the bench and sat down, brushing a droplet from her sleeve. Her breath left her in a long, quiet exhale, the kind that pulled the weight from her shoulders, but not yet from her heart. In the soft gray calm, she could still feel the echo of Ilara's small hand slipping into hers. That gentle insistence, that silent trust. It stirred something inside Rowan, something tender and startling, like a lantern being lit in a dark room she had nearly forgotten existed. She leaned back, letting the cool air lap at her cheeks. The world smelled faintly of wet leaves and distant chimney smoke. a scent that always reminded her of her grandmother's porch in Rutland, those evenings when the older woman would sit with a blanket over her knees, telling stories in a voice that felt like warm tea and patience. Rowan never imagined her own life would begin to feel like one of those stories, unexpected turns, quiet miracles, and moments that changed everything in the span of a single breath. She reached into her box and touched the photograph of her brother. His smile, wide and hopeful in front of a Harvest Festival banner, felt like a hand on her back, steadying her. He had taught her more about empathy than any book or class ever could. She wondered what he might say now, if he would tell her that losing a job for protecting a scared child was, in its own way, a quiet badge of honor. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up to see Bennett and Alara making their way toward the shelter. Bennett carried an umbrella he wasn't using, letting the rain freckle his shoulders. Alara stayed close to him but wasn't clinging. She was moving with that slow, careful confidence she showed only when the world wasn't too sharp. "Hope we didn't miss you," Bennett said, his tone soft as he stepped under the shelter's overhang. Rowan lifted her box slightly. "Just got here." Bennett nodded, rainwater trailing down one side of his temple. "I wanted to make sure you didn't leave without knowing I meant what I said earlier." Alara moved closer to Rowan, half hiding, half curious. She reached out with her fox plush, gently tapping Rowan's knee the same way she had touched her father when she wanted him to focus. Rowan smiled at the gesture. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to keep talking after everything with Marjorie," Bennett added, lowering his voice. "She has a way of complicating things." Rowan let out a small, warm breath. "I've worked under her long enough to know she doesn't need much help complicating things." For the first time since they met, Bennett laughed a soft, genuine sound, worn at the edges like someone who didn't get many chances to use it. He sat down at the far end of the bench, giving Rowan space so she wouldn't feel crowded. Alara stood between them, her feet tapping lightly in a rhythm only she understood. "I've been thinking," Bennett said carefully, resting his hands on his knees, "about what happened inside and outside, and what I asked you before the interruption." Rowan met his gaze, feeling the gentle seriousness in it. "Before anything else," he said, "I want you to know that the offer wasn't out of pity." "I didn't think it was," she replied. He nodded once. "Good, because pity isn't what Alara needs, and it's not something I'd ever want to give someone who just changed my daughter's day." The mist clung to the edges of the shelter, turning the passing headlights into long streaks of gold. A pickup truck rumbled by wipers, swaying like slow metronomes. Down the hill, the river carried the soft rush of autumn rainwater. Bennett continued, "I meant what I said about wanting you to work with us, but I also know it's a lot to ask. It changes things. It asks something of you that's not small." "Ugh." Rowan shifted slightly. "It's not the kind of offer someone makes lightly." "No," he said, "and I didn't." Alara tugged at Rowan's sleeve then, placing the fox plush gently in Rowan's lap. "A peace offering. A question. A request." Rowan traced a finger across the fox's soft ear, moved by the quiet intimacy of the moment. "Alara seems comfortable with you," Rowan said softly. "She's more than comfortable," Bennett replied. "She's steady. I haven't seen her that steady during a meltdown in I can't remember how long." Rowan looked down at the plush, her voice gentle as dusk. "She's an extraordinary child." Bennett smiled faintly. "She is, and she deserves someone who sees her that way." A gust of cool wind swept past the shelter, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp pavement. Two cars splashed through a distant puddle, and the bus stop's overhead light flickered once softly, as if listening. Rowan's mind circled the offer again, feeling its weight, not heavy, but real. A path branching unexpectedly in the middle of a gray Vermont afternoon. And then Bennett said quietly, "I know you need time, but I want you to understand exactly what I'm asking and why." He didn't finish, though the words hovered warm between them, waiting. Bennett rested his elbows on his knees, letting the weight of the moment settle carefully between them. The rain had eased into a faint whisper, tapping rhythmically on the bus shelter's metal roof. Alara stood quietly, her small boots making soft scuffing sounds against the concrete floor. It was one of the few times Rowan had seen her completely free of tension, shoulders unpinched, breath steady, eyes traveling between the two adults who mattered most in her world today. "I'm not just asking you to take a job," Bennett began softly. "I'm asking you to step into a space that matters deeply to us, a space that affects every part of her life and mine." His hand hovered near Alara's shoulder, but didn't rest there. He waited for her to lean in first. When she did, he exhaled with an ease Rowan recognized instantly one only love could produce. Rowan held the little fox plush in her lap, stroking its ear absently. "I wouldn't want to do anything that disrupts her," she said quietly. "Children like Alara, they need consistency, predictability, a foundation." "You'd be giving her exactly that," Bennett replied. "Someone who understands what's happening beneath the surface. Someone who can reach her where panic starts." The bus stop light flickered again, soft as candle glow. Cars passed on the wet road, their headlights leaving smeared reflections on the pavement. The world beyond the shelter felt distant, while here, under fading blue canvas, everything seemed suspended in a kind of gentle, inevitable clarity. "You saw her," Bennett continued. "Not just the meltdown, not just the panic. You saw her. Most people see the overwhelm and stop there. You stepped beyond it." Rowan felt a warmth rise behind her ribs. A warmth that wasn't pride, but recognition of Alara, of her brother, of every moment she had spent trying to help someone be understood. Still, uncertainty lingered. "But what if I can't give her what she needs long-term?" she asked softly. "What if I fail her in ways I don't see coming?" Bennett shook his head gently. "You didn't fail her today, and you didn't fail your brother years ago. Sometimes the people who fear failing the most are the ones who show up exactly as they should." His words struck something deep and tender in her, the kind of reassurance that felt like it had been waiting years to be spoken. Alara reached for Rowan's hand again, not tentative this time, but decisive. The small, silent request made Rowan's breath catch. Children like her didn't extend trust lightly. They didn't offer connection without feeling safe. The bus turned onto the road in the distance, headlights sweeping across the wet pavement as it approached. Rowan could hear the faint hum of its engine, the ordinary sound of a day continuing, even when life was shifting beneath her feet. She lifted her gaze toward the approaching vehicle, the yellow lights growing brighter. Bennett followed her eyes. "You don't have to decide now," he said gently. "Truly. But I needed you to know the door is open. For you and for her." Rowan nodded, grateful for the space he offered. "I'll think about it." "I know," he said. "And whatever you choose, thank you for today. You changed something in her. Maybe in both of us." The bus slowed, brakes sighing softly as it pulled into the stop. It reminded her of something she hadn't thought about in years. A moment from childhood when her younger brother had folded into himself in the middle of a grocery store aisle just like this one. That memory moved through her quietly, the way old echoes sometimes do. She stood up slowly, brushing dust from her jeans, and listened again. Then she heard it clearly: thin, sharp sobs, the kind that came from fear rather than misbehavior, the kind no child could hide. But before she could climb aboard, a familiar, sharp voice sliced through the damp evening air behind them. "Rowan Hale," Marjorie called out from the parking lot, her tone taut with something more than authority. "You and I are not finished." Rowan froze. Bennett's posture stiffened, a protective instinct flaring in his eyes. And Marjorie's final words carried across the wet pavement like a cold wind. "You're not leaving before we settle this." The next morning brought a pale, gentle light over Montpelier, the kind that slipped quietly through curtains and made everything feel softer than it had any right to be. Rowan woke early, long before her alarm, her mind still drifting between the uncertainty of yesterday and the strange new possibility that had opened in front of her. Outside her window, a few yellow leaves skittered down the sidewalk, carried by a breeze that smelled faintly of pine and the first hints of frost. She moved slowly through her morning routine, taking her time with the small things, warming her hands around a mug of tea, choosing a sweater with sleeves long enough to push over her palms, pulling on boots still dusted with dried rain. She didn't have a job to rush to anymore, but somehow today felt fuller than any morning she'd had in a long while. By mid-morning, Bennett's SUV rolled up the quiet street outside her small apartment building. It wasn't loud or flashy, just a well-kept family car with a Vermont license plate and a few scattered leaves stuck to the windshield. When Bennett stepped out, he gave a small wave, the kind reserved for neighbors you hope to know better. Rowan lifted her satchel and walked toward him. "You didn't have to pick me up," she said softly. "I wanted to," Bennett replied. First days shouldn't start alone. There was something so simple in the way he said it that Rowan felt the edges of her worry settle. She climbed into the passenger seat, noting the faint smell of cedar and clean upholstery. Ilara sat in the back, absorbed in arranging her plush toys in a precise little row, her fox plush sitting proudly at the front like a gentle leader. When she noticed Rowan, she paused, then gave a tiny wave, quick, almost shy, but real. "Hi, sweetheart," Rowan said warmly. Ilara didn't speak, but she lifted the fox and tapped its nose twice. Rowan recognized the greeting for what it was, a welcome. As they drove, Bennett kept the radio low, tuned to a soft oldie station that played easy guitar and mellow harmonies. It filled the car like the memory of long road trips or Sunday afternoons on front porches. Rowan watched the scenery roll by maple trees, blazing red and gold, small shops with chalkboard signs, kids walking to school with jackets half-zipped. Vermont in autumn always felt like a postcard. "Marjorie called me last night," Bennett said suddenly, his hands steady on the wheel. "She tried to explain her version of everything." He let out a breath. "But I told her I wasn't interested in excuses." Rowan looked out the window, unsure what to say. "I also told her," Bennett added, "that firing someone for helping a child in distress is exactly the kind of leadership that destroys a workplace." His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but conviction. "You deserved better than that." Rowan felt warmth bloom in her chest, quiet and deep. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded. "Today isn't about that place. Today is about Ilara, and about seeing if this new arrangement feels right for all of us." They arrived at Bennett's home a few minutes later, a stone and wood house nestled near the edge of Lake Champlain, surrounded by trees that rustled softly in the morning breeze. It wasn't ostentatious. It looked like a house meant for living, not impressing. A place where warmth could take root. Inside, the living room was bright with natural light. Large windows framed the lake, reflecting soft ripples across the room. The space had a quiet charm, plaid blankets, shelves filled with books, a few scattered toys that hadn't yet been tucked away. Rowan noticed small details, the weighted blanket on the couch, the noise, dampening curtains, the soft lamps instead of overhead lights. "You've already made this a sensory-friendly home," Rowan said, noticing the thoughtful layout. "I've tried," Bennett replied, "but I still feel like I'm guessing half the time." Ilara walked past them, her steps light, her attention caught by something on the floor, a small wooden puzzle she had left the night before. She sat on the rug and began rearranging the pieces with methodical care. Rowan set her satchel down and crouched beside her. "That one goes in the corner," she said gently, touching one piece but not moving it. "See the rounded edge?" Ilara studied the piece, then placed it correctly. A small, satisfied hum escaped her mouth, a soft sound, but full of triumph. Bennett watched from the doorway, his expression softening into something Rowan hadn't seen on him before. Not just relief, pride. "Would you like to start with grounding exercises?" Rowan asked Ilara, keeping her tone light. The little girl nodded, lifting her fox plush as if he needed to participate too. Rowan sat cross-legged on the rug. "Okay, let's find 3 things you can see." Ilara pointed immediately, first to the window, then to her puzzle, then to Rowan's cardigan sleeve. "Good," Rowan said, her voice warm as a morning fireplace. "Now, 2 things you can hear." Ilara paused, listening deeply. "Water," she whispered. "And the clock." "Perfect. And 1 thing you can touch." Ilara brushed the fox plush against her cheek. Bennett swallowed, quietly overwhelmed. "Rowan, you're remarkable." She didn't answer with anything big, just a soft smile. Children didn't need fireworks to feel safe. They needed calm, presence, a voice that didn't rush them. And somehow, sitting there with Ilara in the quiet morning light, Rowan felt she was exactly where she was meant to be. The house grew quieter as the morning settled, the kind of quiet that felt steady rather than empty. Ilara finished her puzzle and drifted toward the bookshelf, brushing her fingertips over the spines as though listening to them. Rowan watched her with a softened heart. Children like Ilara didn't open up easily, yet today she moved with an ease Rowan hadn't expected to see so soon. "You're remarkable with her," Bennett said as he approached, offering Rowan a warm mug of apple cider. His voice carried both relief and wonder. "I've never seen her regulate that quickly." Rowan held the mug between her palms, letting the heat soak in. "She tells you what she needs," she said gently. "Just not in the ways most people expect." Bennett followed Rowan's gaze to his daughter. "I wish I understood her language the way you do," he murmured. "I keep trying. I worry I'll make things harder without meaning to." "You're doing more right than wrong," Rowan replied. "Life doesn't always pick good timing." Rowan allowed a small smile. "It rarely does." Ilara pressed closer to her father's leg as the wind brushed through her hair, the gentle drizzle now turning the pavement darker, richer. The awning above the empty benches offered shelter beneath its faded blue canvas. Bennett gestured again, quietly, inviting Rowan to sit. She settled onto the bench, resting her box beside her feet. Rowan placed a weighted blanket over Ilara's lap, her voice low and even. "You're safe. Breathe with me." Bit by bit, Ilara settled first her shoulders, then her hands, then her breath. When she finally leaned against Rowan's arm, it wasn't out of overwhelm anymore, but trust. Bennett watched the scene unfold, emotion tightening his throat. "Rowan, what you're doing, it matters more than you know." Rowan didn't answer right away, not because she doubted him, but because the room felt full of something gentle she didn't want to disturb. Ilara stood, walked to the window, then after a moment turned back and crossed the room. Without a word, she placed her fox plush into Rowan's hands, a gesture so earnest it made Rowan's breath catch. Bennett saw it too, his eyes widening with quiet astonishment. "She's never given that to anyone outside family." Rowan held the plush carefully, almost reverently. The weight of the moment warmed her more deeply than the mug had. Then a sudden vibration broke the stillness. Bennett's phone lit up on the counter. He checked the screen, and his expression changed immediately. "Rowan," he said, turning the phone toward her. It was Marjorie Flint. A new message flashed beneath her name. "We need to talk now." "Oh." The call lingered on Bennett's screen, long after the vibration stopped, its faint glow casting a pale square of light against the kitchen counter. Rowan felt a quiet pull in her chest, not fear exactly, but the uneasy sense that something unfinished had stepped back into her day. Ilara stayed close to the window, tracing gentle lines in the fog glass, unaware of the grown-up tension moving through the room. Bennett lowered the phone, his brow drawn. "You don't have to read anything into that," he said softly. "She doesn't get to dictate how today goes." Rowan offered a small nod, though her hand still held the fox plush like an anchor. "She must be upset," she murmured. "But I don't want her frustration spilling into your world, or Ilara's." "It won't," Bennett assured her. "Whatever she wants, it can wait." But even as he said the words, the phone vibrated again, another message. Short, clipped, urgent. He silenced it before the preview appeared, but the air in the kitchen shifted all the same. Rowan set the fox plush carefully on the counter, smoothing its tail. The quiet of the house, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of autumn wind outside felt heavier now. The kind of quiet that waits for truth. "I don't want to complicate things for you," she finally said, "or make today harder than it needs to be." "You're not complicating anything," Bennett replied. "You're helping my daughter find steadiness. That's the only thing that matters." She looked up at him, then really looked and saw a warmth there that wasn't rushed or misplaced, but deeply grounded. The gentleness of someone who had spent years learning to soften because life demanded it. But before she could answer, soft footsteps padded across the rug. Ilara approached, her expression calm again, her fingers lightly brushing Rowan's sleeve, as if checking that she was still there. Rowan bent to her height. "Hey, sweetheart," she said. "You okay now?" Ilara tapped the fox's nose still on the counter, then tapped Rowan's hand, a bridge between the two of them. "She wants you to hold it again," Bennett interpreted quietly. Rowan picked it up, and Ilara leaned her forehead lightly against Rowan's arm in thanks. The moment was so gentle, so profoundly trusting, that it made the earlier tension feel miles away. Still, Rowan felt the truth circling them. She straightened. "If you need to take that call, Bennett, you should," he exhaled, long and slow. "Maybe, but I think I'd rather hear your thoughts first." He paused. "About all of this. About today. About staying." Her breath caught slightly, not because of pressure, but because of sincerity, something she hadn't felt directed at her in a long time. She glanced toward the window where Lake Champlain shimmered faintly under a thin veil of cloud. "I don't want to leave her," Rowan admitted. "And I don't want to leave this feeling of belonging. It's been a long time since I felt useful in a way that mattered." Bennett's voice softened. "You matter here." Before the weight of the words could settle fully, The phone buzzed a third time, this time with a harder, sharper tone. Bennett winced, pulled it from his pocket, and checked the screen. His jaw tightened. Rowan's pulse stilled. "Is it her again?" "Yes," he said quietly. "But this time she sent something else." He hesitated, thumb hovering above the screen, expression shifting from concern to something Rowan couldn't quite read. "She sent an attachment." Rowan's breath drew thin. "What kind?" Bennett swallowed once, then turned the phone so she could see. On the screen was a photo, timestamped that morning. A photo of Rowan, taken outside her apartment. And beneath it, Marjorie's message. "You should know who you're hiring, M." The air in the kitchen seemed to still as Bennett held the phone between them. Rowan felt the weight of his silence before she saw the screen, a tightening in her chest like a door slowly closing. "Rowan, she sent something else," he said, voice low. "What is it?" Rowan asked, though part of her already braced for impact. Bennett turned the phone toward her. It was a photo, grainy, taken from a distance, the morning light catching her as she stepped out of her apartment building. She was holding her satchel, unaware of anyone watching. The timestamp was from less than an hour ago. Rowan's breath hitched. "She followed me? Or sent someone?" Bennett said, anger rising beneath his calm tone. "This isn't just pettiness. This is crossing a line." Rowan felt a chill crawl up her spine, the kind that comes not from fear itself, but from the realization of being observed without knowing it. Ilara drifted closer, sensing the shift in the room, her hand brushing Rowan's wrist as if to check she was still steady. Bennett stepped nearer, lowering his voice so only Rowan could hear. "Whatever this is, you are not facing it alone." His words were warm, steady like a porch light left on in the dark. "She doesn't get to intimidate you. Or us." Rowan tried to breathe past the tightness in her chest. "Why would she send that?" "I don't know," Bennett said. "But we're gonna find out." The phone buzzed again in his hand. A new message from Marjorie flashed onto the screen. This one with only 5 words. "You need to hear the rest." The house had settled into a soft hush, the kind that made every small sound feel clearer, the quiet click of Ilara's wooden figurines on the rug, the faint whisper of wind sliding across the lake outside. Yet beneath that calm, Rowan felt a subtle tremor in her chest. Marjorie's message had stirred something old and unwelcome. Ilara placed a small deer figurine on Rowan's knee, a silent check-in. Rowan touched its back gently, letting the child's presence ground her. Bennett watched them from across the couch, concern warming his expression. "You don't look scared," he said softly. "Just hurt." Rowan nodded. "That's about right. She knows exactly where to press." Bennett leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Whatever she's trying to do, she doesn't get to shake where you stand now." I just don't want my past to walk into your home," Rowan murmured. "It won't," he replied simply. "Not with me here." The certainty in his voice settled something inside her, like a hand easing down on a restless heartbeat. Rowan looked down at her hands. "There are things I never explained. Not secrets, just parts of me I don't lead with." "We all have those," Bennett said gently. "You get to share them when you choose to, not when she tries to force you." Ilara crawled closer, leaning lightly against Rowan's side, tapping her fox plush twice against Rowan's arm, a tiny, instinctive rhythm of comfort. Rowan mirrored it, earning a soft exhale from the child. For a moment, the room felt whole again. Then Bennett's phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up, expecting another blunt message, but his expression shifted, tightening, then softening into something more troubled. "She sent something else," he said quietly. Rowan felt the air shift around her. "What does it say?" Bennett read the preview slowly, his eyes lifting to hers. "He deserves to know why you left the center." Rowan didn't speak at first. The words on Bennett's phone felt like a small crack, opening somewhere she'd kept sealed for years. Not out of shame, out of tenderness, the kind that bruises easily when handled without care. Ilara shifted in her lap, placing her fox plush against Rowan's hand as though offering protection. The gesture broke some of the tension inside her, and she rested her palm lightly on the child's back. Bennett sat beside them now, close but not crowding. "You don't have to explain anything because she's demanding it," he said quietly. "Only if you want to." Rowan nodded. "I know. It's just, she remembers the hardest part of that time. And she knows it still stings." Bennett's gaze softened. People who hold power the wrong way tend to use truth like a weapon instead of an invitation. Rowan let out a breath, tired, but steady. I left the center because I burned out. Completely. I took care of my brother for years while working full-time. And eventually, my mind just couldn't keep going at that pace. Her voice thinned slightly. I walked away before I fell apart in front of the people I was trying to help. That's not something to be ashamed of, Bennett said. That's someone who carried too much for too long. Rowan looked down at her hands. I never told many people. I didn't want it to become the only thing they saw. It's not the only thing I see, he said simply. Not even close. Silence settled again. Gentle, not heavy. The kind that comes when someone has finally spoken a truth they'd held for too long. Ilara tapped her fox's nose against Rowan's arm, then leaned her head on her shoulder, sealing the moment with her quiet trust. Bennett's phone vibrated again. He sighed softly and lifted it, more annoyed than alarmed. It's her again, he murmured. Rowan's shoulders tensed, but she stayed still. Bennett opened the message. His breath paused just a fraction, but enough. What is it? Rowan asked. He hesitated, then turned the phone so she could see the preview. 5 stark words. Ask her who she protected. The message replayed in Rowan's mind like a slow echo. Ask her who she protected. It stayed with her, even as the house settled back into its gentle afternoon rhythm. Ilara sat beside her on the rug, quietly threading wooden beads, humming in that soft way that always pulled the world into something calmer. Rowan matched her breathing to the child's small rhythm. It helped, but the knot in her chest didn't fully loosen. Bennett watched from the couch, elbows resting on his knees. You don't have to say anything because she's pushing you, he said gently. Only if you want to. Rowan nodded slowly. I know, but she's hinting at something that mattered, something I didn't want to drag into your home. Ilara leaned against her side, offering her fox plush in a simple gesture of comfort. Rowan's chest tightened with tenderness as she ran her thumb along the soft fabric. When I worked at the center, Rowan began quietly, there was a boy, Micah, sensitive, bright, overwhelmed easily. She paused. One day he ran out toward the parking lot during a sensory overload. I went after him. I had to. Bennett's expression softened. Of course you did. The administration tried to blame him, Rowan continued. Said he was aggressive. I wouldn't sign the report. I threatened to go to the state board if they filed it. Her voice steadied. So they gave me a choice. Resign quietly, or watch them label that child for life. She swallowed. I protected him, and I'd do it again. A long moment passed, quiet, warm, almost sacred. Bennett leaned closer, voice low. Rowan, that makes you the kind of person I trust with my daughter. Oh. Ilara tapped Rowan's arm twice with her fox, a small, certain sign that she understood enough to offer her own acceptance. For the first time since the message arrived, Rowan's shoulders eased. She wasn't hiding anymore. Not from Bennett, not from the child who now leaned so trustingly against her. But just as the room softened into calm again, a car turned into the driveway. The slow crunch of gravel made Bennett rise instinctively. Rowan's breath caught. Then a woman's voice, sharp-edged, unmistakable, cut through the quiet Vermont air. Rowan Hale, step outside. We're talking now. Rowan held Ilara close as the woman's voice echoed outside. Bennett moved to the door, steady and unshaken. Through the window, Rowan saw Marjorie standing stiffly in the driveway, arms folded like a shield. When Bennett opened the door a crack, Marjorie didn't look at him, only at Rowan. You protected that boy, didn't you? Micah. Rowan stepped forward, voice calm. I protected a child who needed safety. I'd do it again. Marjorie's expression flickered, not anger or remorse. We let them push you out. I let it happen. I told myself it wasn't my fight, but it was. I'm sorry, Rowan. The apology hung in the cold Vermont air, unexpected and fragile. Rowan nodded once. Thank you. That's enough. Marjorie inhaled shakily, then stepped back toward her car. Whatever you're doing here, don't let fear of us dim it. You were always meant for better. When her car pulled away, the silence that settled over the house was soft, almost warm. Ilara walked up to Rowan and pressed her fox plush into her hands, her clearest gesture of acceptance. Rowan knelt, brushing the child's hair back with a tenderness that came naturally. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm staying." Bennett watched them, something hopeful stirring in his eyes. "Rowan, this place already feels more like home with you here." And for the first time in years, Rowan felt that truth settle gently, like a light finally finding its place. In the end, as the Vermont evening settled gently over the lake and the last threads of tension slipped away, what remained was the quiet glow of a home finally beginning to heal. Rowan didn't arrive seeking a second chance, yet she found one anyway, woven through a child's trust, a father's steady gratitude, and the small, everyday mercies that make a life feel whole. Like many of us who've weathered long seasons of loss and uncertainty, she discovered that love often returns in softer forms than we expect, and sometimes in houses we never meant to enter. And perhaps that is the quiet truth this story leaves behind. That redemption doesn't always come with grand gestures, but with simple presence like sitting at a kitchen table after supper, hands wrapped around a warm mug, knowing someone is finally glad you're there. For viewers who've lived many years and carried many memories, you may recognize this feeling the way a small act of kindness, offered without expectation, can turn a lonely road into a doorway of grace. If you felt this story spoke to you, press 1-inch the comments. And if it didn't, or if you have a thought to share, press 0. Your voice matters here. By Hawk. In a world that often asks us to move faster than our hearts can follow, this tale reminds us that unconditional kindness can change a destiny, that everyone deserves love and a place to belong, and that happiness grows when we choose to lift someone else. Just as an old porch light guides travelers home on foggy nights, a single compassionate act can carry another soul through their darkest hour. This isn't just a story, it's a gentle nudge to remember the good we can still do, no matter our age or the years we've lived. So take a quiet moment tonight, maybe after dinner, when the dishes are drying and the house grows still, to think about the people who once steadied your steps, or the ones who might need your steadiness now. And if this story touched your heart, feel free to share it with someone who could use a little warmth. Sometimes, that's how new homes are built, one small kindness at a time.